Good morning. This is Hap May with the Legal Play.
And I am Chelsea El-Azzi, HAP's associate. We are doing our first ever Zoom podcast with a guest speaker today, former probate Judge Akers, Judge Georgia Akers. Miss Akers, even though you're not currently a judge, do people still refer to you as Judge Akers? Is that the official term?
Yes, they do. But, you know, I'll answer to anything.
Okay. I'll just go ahead and call you Judge Akers.
Okay.
Okay. So Judge Akers was an associate judge of Harris County Probate Court 3 for 10 years. Is that correct?
12 years.
12 years. Okay. We might need to update our website. And she currently is an adjunct professor at the University of Houston Law Center teaching administration of estates and guardianship, which is basically probate administration, right?
Exactly.
Okay. I do want to ask though, as you were an associate judge, what is there's a couple of judges in probate courts I know. What's the difference between just judge and associate judge?
The associate judge doesn't have to run for office and serves the judge and can do whatever he wants he or she to do. I can preside over trials. I can sign documents. I can hear wills. It's whatever the judge assigns me to do. With Probate Court 3, I was in charge of hearing the will docket, the guardianship docket, the heirship docket, and then he would assign a few trials that needed a lot of patience and time.
Judge Akers is also of counsel here at the May firm, and currently she hosts mediations here in office. That's what she spends most of her time doing these days, between that and the administration of estates class at UH. I also hear, Judge Akers, that you grew up on a ranch. You have a herd of over 100 well-bred PBR bucking bulls in Oklahoma?
Yes, I do, with my partner.
Okay. That's a lot. That's a lot of bulls.
Well, it's the cows and the babies, and it varies from year to year. Like right now is calving season, so we have a whole bunch of new babies on the ground. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago, and it's really fun to see the little calves and just see how the ranch is doing.
Okay, that's fun. That's definitely different than being in the courtroom, I imagine.
Yes.
Okay.
It's very enjoyable for me to go up there and see the skies and, you know, the stars, and just kind of relax and visit with cowboys.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we may be able to talk about that a little bit later, but today's topic is interview with a former probate judge. So getting back to it, generally speaking, for a lot of people who don't understand what probate court is or what probate judges do, I guess the first question we can start with is, what does a probate judge do?
Well, let's first talk what a probate court jurisdiction is. A probate court can hear wills, trusts, guardianships, and in probate court number 3, we also had the civil mental health docket. So that was kind of the items that would come into our court. Now, what a probate court does is, when someone dies, the will has to be probated, or there has to be some action taken in order to manage the estate. And it is up to the probate court to hear those matters, rule on those matters, and appoint the appropriate person to serve.
Okay.
So we're a specialty court in that we hear things dealing with estates, whether it be a decedent's estate or a guardianship estate.
Now, well, that's the start of jurisdiction. The cases get much broader than that.
They do. There's a part in the statute that says anything that's matters incident to an estate. So that gives us a lot of leeway to hear divorce cases in a situation with a guardianship, or a personal injury lawsuit, or a contract dispute if it is involved in a decedent's estate. So yes, it does give us a lot more. It's making it convenient where it's all in one court. It doesn't make sense to have the will and an executor in a decedent's estate in probate court 3, and then they have to go to a district court because there's a personal injury lawsuit. That can be brought into the probate court and heard in the probate court, which kind of tidies it up and keeps it in one court.
Okay, as long as it's all kind of related to the administration of the decedent's estate.
Yes, the decedents are a ward's estate.
Or a ward's estate. Okay. And so you teach administration of estates at the University of Houston Law Center. Can you explain what the students do and learn in that class?
This is a specialized class. It's called an experiential class, meaning experience. I call it a skills class. U of H requires their students to take 2 skills classes, and mine is one they can select from. And I don't teach wills and trust. That usually has already been taught in the fall, and I teach in the spring. And I teach them the ins and outs in administering an estate, from reviewing flawed wills, how to get those wills into probate, and then the actual administration scenarios that they would run across in administering estate and how to resolve those issues.
Are there any common issues or hangups that each semester's worth of semester's group of students tends to face? Do you see some common reoccurring issues or hangups for each student group?
Not really. The questions are kind of all over the wall depending on what we're talking about. It's a real practical class. You know, I start out saying a client comes into your office and this is the problem. Now, how are you going to advise the client? It's not theory. Most people think of law school as theory. That's not what this class is.
Well, and I being a recent UH Law Center graduate, that class was one of the ones I considered taking, and it just didn't work out for my schedule that semester, unfortunately. But I did hear from a lot of my peers that it was one of the best, most practical, interesting classes that they had taken. Hey, we should have worked out.
That's nice to hear. And I still hear from my students. I let them know that they've got me for life. They've got my cell phone. They've got my email address. And after they get out in the practice of law, if they have any questions, they can reach out to me. I try to be available. I just feel like as a lawyer and a judge, but mainly as a lawyer, if you have expertise and can mentor young law students, you should, to keep them from making mistakes.
Well, and I feel like administration of estates and probate, it's very specific and specialized, and there's a lot of things that go into it that I think a lot of people and a lot of practicing attorneys, if they're not probate attorneys, don't understand certain processes and procedures that need to happen.
They don't.
So,
I get emails from lawyers too. We are blessed to have a wonderful estates code. There's a lot of statutes in there that if there's a problem with the will, probably there's some place in the estates code that will fix it or make it so that you can get it into probate. So we are very fortunate to have that. What a lot of people don't understand from the standpoint of being an estate lawyer is you're like the manager. You are managing this estate legally. You are not expected to know every part of the law. And for instance, if I have an estate that has mineral rights and a company comes to me and says, look, we would like to lease those mineral rights, I'm the manager. I'm going to reach out to an oil and gas attorney to review that case or review that contract and give me feedback on, advise me, because as a probate lawyer, you just can't know it all. Because you never know. I tell my students, it's like the Forrest Gump saying, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Well, that's an estate. You never know what's going to be in it. For instance, in our case, in our court, we had Dr. DeBakey, the world famous cardiac surgeon. He had like 17 or 18 patents for surgical instruments that as he was learning heart surgery, the instrument wasn't there, and he had a machinist that he worked with, and they made these instruments and he patented them. Or you might have for instance, like a royalty, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film was in our court. It was written by a young lady who was a sophomore at University of Texas at the time. And the first film was a bunch of her friends, and she was in it. And when she died without a will. And it went to her niece, and her niece came and was telling me about it. And that like HBO had offered her $250,000 for the rights to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think there's like Chainsaw Massacre 2, 3, 4. So that to me is what makes probate so fascinating. Each estate is different, not only for the assets that might be in the estate, but also the family dynamics, because you've got the court, you've got to realize that the death of a loved one changes the family dynamics. And when that person comes to court, it's like the final nail in the coffin. It's the reality that that person is really gone. And the reactions, it can be hard on that person. And as a judge, I recognize that. And I always had a box of Kleenex on the bench, because sometimes when they started talking and giving the testimony, they would start crying. And it's an emotional time. And as a judge, you just need to recognize this. Also, as a judge, I recognize there's a lot of times lawyers that aren't the experts in probate. And we have a staff, which is unusual for courts, and they go over the will, they go over the pleadings ahead of time, and they will call the lawyer saying, look, don't forget to bring this, or you need to do this before we can hear it, so that they're prepared and they look good for to their client.
Something else. I mean, I understand the tearfulness, and that's normal. You know, what I guess I don't like about probate practice is that's kind of once, you know, dad dies, the war starts. We either have siblings that are fighting amongst each other, or the classic case of, you know, young second wife's battle with, you know, children from the first marriage. And it gets ugly.
You're right. And most of the battles the majority of the battles are between the second wife and the children from the first marriage. Occasionally we get siblings, but most of the battles are that second wife and making sure that our second husband, but mainly it's the wife, hopefully Dad has written an ironclad will. But you're right. Most of our will contests are situations where there's a new will that maybe cuts the children out completely or leaves it all in trust with the second wife as trustee.
Mm.
And there's questions about her doing her fiduciary duty. So you're very right. And that's part of probate. I mean, that's part of probate.
Well, Judge Akers, speaking to, I guess, people's, just people individuals coming into probate court for the first time, do you find that there's often misconceptions about what's going to happen in probate court that you have to kind of correct as you go along?
Many times it is the first time they've ever been in a court. I've had a lot of widows and widowers that have never been in a court before. So I think our probate judges try to realize that some of them are just terrified at being at court, and especially when they have to come up in front of the bench. It's not what they expect. Hopefully their lawyers have gone over the questions that they're going to need to ask. And because they can lead their witness and just all they have to do is say yes or no in most cases. But we try to make them feel at ease. When they come up, I always, good morning, how are you? If I see they're nervous, I'll say, just listen to your lawyer. He'll get you through this. If the lawyer forgets something, I'm not going to embarrass the lawyer in front of his client. I will ask the question that maybe needs to be part of the record. But they walk in, they see the bailiff, they see the court reporter, and they see this judge up on this podium, platform. But to me, that's what's different about probate versus some of the other courts that are very adversarial. Now, I'm speaking the routine probate. When you get into the will contest, then it's litigation.
Right. Well, and I don't know if that would be along the lines of this next question I'm about to ask, but what was your biggest pet peeve as a probate judge?
From a litigation standpoint, an attorney giving me a case saying, oh, this is right on point, and I guess he thinks I'm not going to go back and read it, and it's not on point. He picks, it's usually an attorney that just reads the keywords at the front of a case. A case is set up, you pull it, and it has the key points. But when you get into actually reading the case, it has a whole different flavor. So that was one of my things. Being late was another. I prided myself to always be on time, or usually would start a few minutes early, because you have a docket of 30 people, 30 attorneys, plus their clients that have come downtown. They probably don't want to be there. So I would start. So being on time, I had one lawyer that he couldn't be on time if his life depended on it. And I said to him at one time, I said, if you are ever on time, I will let you be the first one on the docket. And one time he was on time and I saw him walk in. I said, come on down.
Oh,
But
well, I guess
Hmm?
I said, let that be a lesson to our listeners and viewers. Be on time. Don't be late.
Yes, at least in my court. Now, I know sometimes in the back, judges get tied up, a phone call comes in or a staff member comes in and has a question, and they might be a few minutes late. But I think most of our judges are pretty good at, if you say you're having a 9 o'clock docket or a 10 o'clock docket, starting it at 10 o'clock. Pet peeve from the lawyers is you're not being prepared. You don't have your questions. You don't have the proof of death and other facts, which is the questions you ask your client has to be reduced to writing, and they won't have it, or they'll show up without an order. Luckily, we have, for your regular probate wills, we have some canned orders that they can fill out, and we have canned proof of deaths. But, you know, I expect a lawyer to be prepared to know the questions they need to ask, have it reduced to writing, and have an order to submit to me. Now, if the order needs tweaking, I'll tweak it. But they should have those documents and the oath with them.
Okay. So you did speak to like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and some other, you know, clients and in cases you remember. Do you have a most memorable case or a most memorable moment in your courtroom?
Some of the wills were just, I couldn't believe. I remember one where a woman died, and in it said, I never was very good, I'm paraphrasing, I never was very good to my husband. So I leave my husband to my two sisters to find him a good woman. And what I remember is one of the sisters popped up and said, I don't want him. And I had
disclaiming her inheritance.
Yeah, that's what matter of fact, I brought it up to my class and I said, is this a disclaimer? Another incident was when I was a lawyer practicing, and I was in Montgomery County with a judge in Montgomery County, and they didn't have a probate judge back then. So he's doing a million different things and he's not really listening to the testimony. Well, my client the decedent had been married 6 times. And so you have to go through, he was divorced, he was divorced, he was divorced. And the judge looked up and said, oh, are those the children? And I said, no, Your Honor, those were the previous wives. And you could see he's mortified. Oh, you know, he felt so embarrassed. And all of a sudden my client popped up and said, took him a while to get it right, but he got it right this time. So, you know, those are the moments I remember as a lawyer, but then being on the judge, some of the wills, what people would put into them, I said, I can't believe they're, you know, this is kind of personal. It has nothing to do, but it was important to them at the time.
Yeah. And I don't know that you can like legally just say, all right, here, sisters, you can go find him another wife, and then you know, write your order and saying, all right, I ordered the sisters to go find him another wife.
No, I just admit the will to probate, and they do what they want to do. But it was just so funny when I pointed this out, and she just popped up and said, I don't want him. I felt sorry for the husband at that point. But you have instances like that. And then you have the sad incidents. 9/11. We received a small estates affidavit, which is something you can do out of probate. And it wasn't done correctly. And I called the lady to tell her the issues. Well, it turned out her son was at the Pentagon on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hold it right there. We're going to take care of this. And the probate bar, the lawyers in the probate bar are the greatest group of lawyers. They're professional. They're compassionate. They realize that one day they might be on the opposite side, but the next day they might be together. And I had a bunch of them in my email address, and I put out an email. I said, I need an airship done and I need an ad litem for this family whose son died at 9/11 at the Pentagon. And immediately my email blew up. We'll do it. We'll pay the fees. We'll do whatever you want. So I selected 2 lawyers. One was a former JAG, so he knew the military. And when that hearing for the heirship was in our court, you could have heard a pin drop. It was so quiet. As soon as the testimony was, your son died in Washington, D.C. in 9/11. So you have, and even now it brings tears to my eyes. You have moments like that you'll never forget. The Challenger crew, all those estates were in our court.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And we had a variety of ad litems because the children and the family, the widower, because the widower, that was in our court, and how creative the attorneys were on setting up trusts for those children, because the Congress, the government came through with some money to set up trusts, even for the ones that were in Israel. And then, so there's memorable moments like that you remember. Are notable people in Texas, like the McNair estate was in our court. And there was an issue with the will. I mean, this wonderfully drafted will, but there was an issue with it. So yeah, there's funny things you remember, but then there's the very solemn things like 9/11 and the Challenger children and things like that. And one of the things with the other part that we haven't touched on is guardianship. And I feel through the pleadings, because everything has to be court approved, that I got to know these children. You have two types of guardianship. You have guardianships of the older people that are incapacitated, but then you have guardianships of young people that someone has left them an inheritance. And I remember one family where there was more than enough money to support dad, who was incapacitated, but he had these children and there was plenty of money to send them to school. And I would get these applications for high school, for college, for graduate school. And it's like, over that 16 years that I was in probate court, I never met them, but I felt like I knew them. And
Yeah,
to me, that's kind of,
yeah.
what
You
I love
seem
about
you
the
get a
court.
window into people's lives, I think.
Yes.
That's
And
interesting.
And then you see the good siblings, the brothers and sisters that get along. And there was one instance that the mom, one of the brothers, I think, lived here. And so she had set up all these bank accounts with right of survivorship. And there was very little in the estate for the other three brothers. Well, the brother with the right of survivorship came in. And he said, that's not what my mother wanted. She wanted it split among the four of us. So that's a good family. That's a strong family, rather than the brother saying, well, I took care of her and she wanted me to have all the money. So we saw both sides.
Right. I feel like we could probably have a second interview with you at a later date and get into all other kinds of questions and maybe even develop the guardianship estate a bit more.
And I'd like to bring her back to talk about mediations at some point in time, a separate topic.
Right.
Okay, be happy to.
We do need to wrap up, but I wanted to kick it over to Hap and say, ask Hap, do you have any last little questions or anything you'd like to say before we end this particular topic?
Well, I think first of all, thank you for coming. I enjoyed this, and I hope our viewers enjoyed it as well. And we will have you back in the process. So let's go ahead and wrap it up and do it again sometime.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes,
right.
Thank you so much, Judge Akers, for being here.
All right, this is Hap May with the Legal Play.